I put these cards in there.
Oh, those are nice.
Hi, welcome everyone. Good evening. We're so excited that you're here for the launch of a brand new series at Creative Capital called Creative Conversations. I'm Ruby Lerner, and I'm the founding executive director and president of Creative Capital. Since 1999, we have funded the work of some of this country's most influential artistic voices, from visual to performing arts, literature to moving image, to our ever-evolving emerging fields category. Our 642 grantees have helped advance our understanding of often complex and daunting topics. Creative Conversations feels like a logical evolution of that work as cohorts of artists addressing similar topics and themes have emerged over the past 17 years. It's our hope that these conversations will help build bridges among artists, activists, policymakers, and thought leaders working on similar issues, and that they will position art and artists as integral to realizing personal, social, and legislative change. I hope that you will continue to spread the word about this program and that you will bring these creative conversations into your everyday life. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Jonathan Kitt from the Creative Capital staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. Greetings, everybody.
Greetings.
Greetings. My name is Jonathan Kitt, and I am the Senior Development Associate here at Creative Capital. Mass incarceration is a reality faced by many people across the country. From those who enter the system as juvenile offenders to the children of the incarcerated, from adults currently in custody to those re-entering the mainstream population, to the communities that house correctional facilities, the prison industrial complex has and continues to affect the lives of millions of Americans. The 5 Creative Capital artists you see before you are using their work to give voice to an often overlooked group of human beings. These dynamic individuals are varied in their perspectives, but united in their belief that art is a valuable means of illuminating and intervening in what is arguably one of the most pressing social issues of our time. In the 17 years since our founding, Creative Capital has provided $1.2 million in financial and advisory support to 24 projects addressing criminal justice and mass incarceration. We've gathered artists, activists, funders, thought leaders, and members of the public to brainstorm how we can position art and artists at the center of these conversations. Each artist will present their work, and then the moderator will open the discussion to questions from our audience. Please also come to our post-show reception where you can meet one another and mingle with the artists. In addition to all of you in our live audience, thank you for coming, there are hundreds of people across the country watching right now. Please say hello to our virtual audience. We want you all to lend your voices to this conversation. So we are live tweeting, and those of you who are watching us virtually can use the hashtags Creative Convos, hashtag mass incarceration, hashtag artist voices to tag your questions and comments during the program and to continue the discussion afterwards. The artists have offered to respond to your tweets in the coming days, so please do not hesitate to let us know what's on your mind. And please visit our website at creative-capital.org to learn more about all of our artists and how you can support their work. Lastly, because we're recording live, please take this moment to silence your cell phones. Please. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel in presenting order. From Baltimore and Seattle, Paul Rucker. From Wilmington, North Carolina, Nick Szuberla. From Phoenix, Arizona, Gregory Sale. From Chicago, Illinois, Maria Gaspar. From Brooklyn, Shawn Peters. And also from Brooklyn, our moderator and executive director of our funding partner, the Lambent Foundation, Michelle Coffey. Please give our panel a round of applause.
Good evening, everyone, and many thanks, Jonathan, and thanks to Creative Capital for your role, practice, and work in supporting and listening to the leading artist voices and creating platforms such as this one that broadcast artistic vision, practice, and their critical relevance to our time. This evening's creative conversation takes its cue and its lead from 5 spectacular artists working at the intersection of criminal justice reform. Yeah, not a small containable discussion topic. This is not a comprehensive overview, nor will it be specific in perspectives such as juvenile justice, sentencing reform, solitary confinement, etc., etc. This is actually a pilot for Creative Capital to face outward, to promote dialogue and discussion with artists at the center. So let's jump right now into the presentations. And so, James, will you start us off? Paul, excuse me.
He looks like a junkie.
My name is Paul Rucker, and I created an animated map of the United States prison system. I did this after I attended a retreat at the Blue Mountain Center. I wanted to visualize mass incarceration because you can tell there are 2.3 million people incarcerated, 1 in every 99, but it was better to show instead of just tell. The yellow dots you see up here are prisons that were built before 1900 and 1940. The orange dots are between 1941 and 1980, and the red dots are between 1980 and 2008. Since 1976, the U.S. has built on average 1 new prison a week. The U.S. makes up 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the prison population. There are many factories in a lot of the federal prisons. There are 109 factories in 102 federal prisons ran by Unicor, also known as the Federal Prison Industries. They were founded in 1934, and they make everything from furniture to electronics, helmet and night vision goggles. They're the 47th biggest military contractor. And Unicor pays its prisoners or workers between 23 cents to $1.15 an hour. Many companies use prison labor. Whole Foods, McDonald's, Walmart, Starbucks, Sprint, Verizon, Victoria's Secrets, JCPenney, Kmart, American Airlines, and Avis. So when you call a call center and you're reserving that flight or you're reserving that rental car, you say, hey, it wasn't from East India. It could be right in your own backyard. It could be a prison close by. And right now there are more than 1,719 state prisons. It's hard to look at mass incarceration without thinking about the people inside who are actually suffering and who are actually affected by this. Out of all the prisons that you're seeing here, people are inside each one of those dots, and there's not a single dot repeated, and only 8 of the dots are inactive right now.
Now you're pointing at the screen.
Okay, this is a steal from Proliferation. And I want to thank the prisonpolicy.org for providing the data for this information for this map that I created. They're amazing. Rose Hare did the research for these locations, and I wanted to bring it to life. Peter Wagner with the Prison Policy organization, he sent me this prison map with this slave density map. This is from the 8th census of the United States, and it shows the density of the slave population. My project with Creative Capital parallels slavery in the prison system, and the more information you know about each one, you'll see that there are many, many parallels, mainly the labor aspect. The areas you see flashing here, there's slave population of 50% or more. If you go along the Mississippi River, you can see some areas where 8 out of 10 and 9 out of 10 people along the river, they were slaves. And this is where a lot of course, industry was, and a lot of, they were using the river to move things. And if you go to my home state of South Carolina, there were more slaves in South Carolina in 1860 than there were free. Same with Mississippi. Cotton in 1860 alone was about 65% of the exports, and it amounted to $200 million. And that would equal $5 billion today. And there's a bridge during Reconstruction when we had the convict leasing program where blacks were being picked up and for simple offenses as loitering or walking along railroad tracks, and they were using those folks as labor. And up until 1940s, black kids as young as 5 were being tried as adults. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Nick?
Good evening. Nick Szuberla, Working Narratives. David Tracy was 18 when he was arrested in Bridgeport, Connecticut for a handful of weed, and he was shipped to a supermax prison in Virginia where he was held in a cell for 23 hours a day. In 1998, I received the first of what would become hundreds of letters from those inside 2 supermax prisons near my rural home describing human rights violations. They didn't write me because I was an artist. They wrote because I was a volunteer DJ playing hip hop in a sea of bluegrass. Their letters spoke of electronic stun belts, 5-point restraining tables, and deaths. We couldn't gain direct access to the story. Interviews denied. Correction officers would stop by my house and explain that reports of abuse were unfounded. One narrative was the exile of urban citizens. The other story was the creation of a new profit center in struggling rural America. Artists can be a point of resistance to the carceral island. And for every artist on the outside, there are artists inside as well. Social movements are built and thrive on the call and response of our songs and dance. Now, little did I know that when we filmed this footage, writer, poet Reginald Dwayne Betts was inside Red Onion State Prison on the day this was filmed. While we were looking in at the story from the outside, he was living it and capturing the prison from within. Betts, now studying at Yale Law School, writes, "Longer than a sinner's prayer in Red Onion's small ruined cells, where 10,000 years of sentences beckon over heads and hearts, silent a promise like mistletoe." In early 2000, we began working with folks like Lily Branch Kennedy, who, upon hearing her son's sentence, thought the judge, let's see here. We'll get the image of Lily up here. Yeah, one more. All right, so we started working with folks like Lily, who, upon hearing her son's sentence, thought the judge had said maybe 105 days, maybe 105 months, but had actually said 105 years. Together, we organized a weekly radio broadcast, Calls from Home, that sent family voices over the airwaves to their loved ones. This became a point of departure for a long-haul organizing effort.
Hey, Uncle Mike, I love you. I want to wish you a Merry Christmas, and this is Crystal. Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Love you. I love you. Uncle Mike. I love you.
Okay, this is to John Clark in Manchester, Kentucky, and I wanted him to know that I've got cookies made for Christmas and that I love him, and I wish him all the peace of God. I pray that he is okay.
I'd like to say, Daddy, we love you, Daddy, and Crystal says she loves you too. Merry Christmas. Love you. I hope you get home soon. Take care, Dad. Please don't forget that I love you.
So the Virginia Department of Correction called us up and said, who gave you permission to do that show? Now, 15 years later, I think they've gotten used to it occurring. And this is early on. We were about a couple hundred folks in our little community, and Creative Capital and the MAP Fund were brave enough to give us some seed money to get going. We began fighting grassroots campaigns together, and we built a platform and a network to house this work, Nation Inside, named for the millions of people impacted by mass incarceration, bringing together grassroots groups, technologists, and artists to build community power together. Today, we have 43 campaigns run by 88 campaign managers, folks like Lily, with close to 400,000 individuals, and we're not stopping. The project is backboned by the Prison Poetry Workshop. Think about Gwendolyn Brooks driving down to visit Etheridge Knight at the Indiana State Prison, for example, a residency program that links artists with grassroots campaigns across the country that are working locally to end mass incarceration, and a large-scale public art project, Black Man Running, that hacks the 5K running dynamic into a community performance project. There we go. Now, thousands of folks across the country, tens of thousands, deal with the cost of high prison phone calls. And so we started the Campaign for Prison Phone Justice that mobilized those families, including many people inside, to fight prison profiteering. Hundreds of millions of dollars at stake. It's a $400 million a year industry. And thousands of prisoners wrote in, bringing their voice, sending their voice to the Federal Communications Commission. And we actually won 2 historic rulings that placed rate caps on the cost of prison phone calls. And this was bringing artists, smart policy groups, and grassroots organizers together, currently working its way through the DC federal court system. When policy shops and artists come together, we
32.
can fight mass incarceration.
8.5. 26 years, 7 months.
11 years. 23 and a half years.
1 day. 6 years. 8.5 years.
Over 5 years.
39 years, 8 months, 5 hours, and 24 minutes.
John, Nevada cured 40 years.
LaShawna Tyson, I served 13 years in prison. Cassandra, 1 year.
6 months.
9 years.
4 years.
5 years.
10 years. 1 month.
14 years? 15?
27 years, 10 months, 18 days.
6.5 years. 11 years, 8 months.
60 months.
4 years.
6 years of prison, 18 years extended supervision.
4 years as a juvenile.
6 years, 8 months.
15 to include 10 years solitary confinement.
4 years, 3 months. El Ahmed, 2 decades, Rockefeller drug policy.
Thanks, Nick.
Hello, I'm Gregory Sale, and I'm an advocate for justice reform and successful reentry after incarceration. I began this work over 10 years ago in response to the heavy-handed justice and media stunts of Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio. These long-term projects invite disparate constituencies to engage in dialogue and creative process. When participants in my projects began completing their prison and jail sentences, I witnessed firsthand the daunting task of finding a job or a place to live. Developing artistic responses to this crisis has become the focus of my work. After the guests settle into their seats, the room darkens. The screen lights up with an image of a hand painting black stripes on a white wall. Inmates are painting the walls of the museum in their own likeness. 5 minutes into the film, a young man in jeans and a t-shirt stands up. He makes his way towards the aisle. He takes a seat in a row of chairs reserved for honored guests. What the audience didn't initially know was that the same individuals who were in the film as inmates were sitting next to them as free citizens. This framing supported a breakdown of social barriers that gave way to a meaningful conversation. Listen to a participant's story.
I served 7 years at Perryville for a securities fraud crime, and this is my family. When I had breast cancer in Sheriff Joe's jail, the drug addicts, the prostitutes, and the thieves looked after me. I found my passion in prison, and now I run a nonprofit agency called Gina's Team. We bring educational programs back into the prisons, and we have a welcome home program to meet the women when they get out and mentor them and help them.
Last year, I became an embedded artist with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, also known as ARC. ARC was founded by Hollywood producer Scott Butnick and works to help young adults get a fresh start. Its members are committed to positive change in their lives. They share their turnaround stories with legislators to convince them that rehabilitation is possible, leading to laws for more humane sentencing for juveniles and restored budgets for prison college programs. To complement this policy work, ARC members and I identified the need for the formerly incarcerated to take control of how their stories are framed. Together, we conceived of an arts-based public service campaign focused on raising awareness, changing the way their stories are framed, exploring creative process, reimagining themselves, their positions in society, and society's response to them, and moving beyond the paradigm of inside and outside. Through exhibitions, public programs, and media displayed on public transportation, we will bring the active voice of returning citizens into the national groundswells of public dialogue on criminal justice reform. Rap Sheet to Resume is a project about individuals who've spent time inside the system, coming out and having an artistic exploration as a means to reimagine themselves and their positions in society and society's response to them.
But I'm sure there were times when it felt like it was impossible. Like, man, I'm never gonna get out of here, right? And then next thing you know, what happens? Boom, just like that, right? The dream becomes a reality.
Like some people might have went to college, some people went to the military. Me, I was in prison. That was my learning space in life.
I fixed the phone several times, and a captain told me, you should be an electrician. Now I don't know which job to pick, electrician, plumber.
It sounds to me like you're real good at troubleshooting, you're real good at critical thinking, things like that. Because that's the way that looks on the resume once you write that down.
And what Johnny was teaching about how you present yourself, what your resume needs to look professional. Those are all these things about the way we present ourselves, right? There are these things on the outside. I'm always interested in art that doesn't just represent something, but that is something. And yet, to get there, we need to represent. What's your past color?
Green. Every time I got any green clothes, I escaped.
We all made that statement, I don't want to wear no green for rain. But it don't have to be that way. Green can be something beautiful too. Even though it was depressing at one point, we can reverse it.
I was thinking about how here this color that has been used in this institutionalized context has gathered so much meaning for all of you. And that part of our work together has been about freeing yourselves of that meaning, right? And so the possibility that we could be, as a group, empowering each other by talking about where we want to go or where we already are. We're creating new meaning, and we're creating meaning together. Thank you.
Thanks, Gregory. Maria, will you join us?
Good evening. My name is Maria Gaspar. James, Southside Chicago. You can feel it, like when you cross the river, that you can feel the jail is coming. Like the energy, everything shifts and changes. The air is different. It's almost like the sky looks different. Aaron, 26th in California. I don't try to get caught over here at night. It's too rough. Because they got Latin Kings down here, they got Sam City Royals down there, then they got Vice Lords back that way, and then you got Disciples going east. So it's a big boundary, and they all can't overstep their boundaries. They try to limit their movement around the jail, because they know if they come out of the jail, they're most likely gonna get caught back in the jail. So basically, they just stay back towards 21st. They don't come towards 26th out of 31st. Simone, 25th Street. It feels like it's got its back turned on you. That's what it feels like. It feels like it wants nothing to do with you, you know? It's just a big, tall wall, and that's what it is. It allows then the community to just turn its back on that space and just kind of shut it out. These are excerpts from interviews with residents, passerby, and former detainees at the Cook County Jail in Chicago. This photo was taken at a locally sponsored festival by the Chamber of Commerce, where I was thinking about which way people were looking or not looking and why. The Cook County Jail sits at the center of the South Lawndale community, a neighborhood of 80,000 residents. The jail is equivalent to 74 American football fields. 74. The jail holds about 10,000 detainees daily and 100,000 people yearly. That's about the size of Berkeley, California. I also grew up a few blocks away from the jail. I was about 12 years old when I first visited the jail as part of a Scared Straight program. And years later, as an artist, educator, and organizer, my interactions would involve working with young people and families who are all too familiar with the carceral state and its effects on people of color, the poor, and the mentally ill. The jail is located in a mostly low-income to working-class community, mostly made up of an immigrant population. This is not a prison, it's a jail. 95% are awaiting trial, sometimes up to 6 years. 85% have been charged with nonviolent offenses, or what the sheriff calls crimes of survival, due to severe state and federal budget cuts to mental health services. In fact, the jail is called the largest mental health facility in the country. A 2015 article called Chicago's $1 Million Blocks identified 5 communities, all on the south and west sides of the city, as the largest jail populations. They described this as a spatial unevenness. For example, if you break down the cost of incarceration by community, you're looking at thousands of dollars going towards incarcerating more people in these 5 parts of the city, rather than alternative solutions that would provide meaningful and impactful support. They state, "We are not simply punishing people for the crimes they commit. We are also punishing them for the places where they live, the schools that failed them, and the employers that rejected them. And without question, we are punishing them for the darkness of their skin." These factors work together to shape who gets portrayed as a criminal and who escapes such portrayals. I began 96 Acres Project in 2012 with many local collaborators and community organizations. 96 Acres Project addresses issues of mass incarceration on communities of color to create counter-narratives through art. We engage creative ways that reimagine the brutal 96-acre compound and bring it to light through the stories and experiences of people most affected. The 96 Acres Project now has a steering committee, an education initiative, an audio archive of personal stories and sound work, and it has completed 8 site-responsive projects collaborating with artists from Chicago to New York. We are made up of a dedicated group of educators, artists, youth, journalists, organizers, the formerly incarcerated, and families, and many others, an incredible resource of invaluable community scholarship. The large-scale interventions we've produced over the last 2 years aim to critically and thoughtfully engage neighbors and other county residents through actions at and around the jail. I will present 2 project excerpts to give you a sense of the kinds of art interventions 96 Acres has led. Here, local youth generated quotes, then power washed them onto the jail wall using a removal process. They were interested in implicating the viewer through provocative questions. That's the wrong video.
I feel like
it's the one before. Can you click on the screen? Maybe that'll... Okay, I will skip that then. I will describe the video for you. It was a group of young people that worked with a local graffiti blaster who normally blasts away graffiti in Chicago, but instead he brought his power washer out and used it to remove the dirt away from the wall, thus revealing text. So some of the language they came up with were questions like, what's your role? And other kinds of things that were meant to really kind of think about all the viewers that see that space and how they can start to engage with it. And then last fall, we organized an event where we projected 2 animations, one by a local high school art teacher and her former student whose father was incarcerated for over 20 years and dealt with tragedy for most of her life, and an animation produced by our friends at the Prison and Neighborhood Art Project that run a program at Stateville Prison with 11 incarcerated men, some serving several life sentences. We wanted to present stories from both sides of the wall.
I feel like it's breathing air into the neighborhood, like a side of, it's literally the side of the jail from inside and out, because we're representing the letters Melissa gets from her father, and then what he saw in there, and then her reflections about it, and what was happening outside of jail when she was at home with her mom.
I happened to be passing by, my daughter was looking at it. She's like, Mom, let's see what it is. So then we started reading it. It made me sad because it made me think about my son and his daughter. You know, he made a mistake once and then he did it twice. So she's little right now, but when she grows up, maybe that's how she's gonna feel. A lot of people don't understand it until you're living it, you know? I mean, I never expected my son to be in there. Until it happens to you, then you know how it feels.
So through the support of Creative Capital, I'm currently developing a radio project called Radio Active, where we will not only continue audio programming outside the jail, but begin programming inside the jail, working with the currently incarcerated, where sound and first-person narratives transcend divisions and systemic structures in hopes to not continue to turn our backs on that jail, but rather to create opportunities for listening and seeing a more humanizing, tender, and critical voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And Shawn.
Do you mind playing the video first?
He asked for 1 second.
The rich had everybody's back, the people that grew up around him. You know, and it was hard. Like, even to this day, I ask God, like, why you gotta take him away? Why him? Like, it's hard. You know, I got pictures in my dresser, always looking up. Like, we had a group picture, I'm looking at it, and I'm like, dang, you know, he's not here. To me, after he passed away, I think everybody just fell apart. You know, there's so much you could do and so much you could hang on to. And it's hard. To this day, it's one wish I ever had. If he could come back to life. You know, that was my, like, sidekick, you know. It was like Batman, Robin. Whoever's Batman, whoever's Robin, I don't care. But that dude, every time I think about him, brings me down to tears. Because I knew how good of a person he was. I don't care what people say in the streets, because nobody could say nothing bad about him.
My name is Carlos, and I grew up in Southside Williamsburg. And I'm Little Rich's boy. Honestly, what I will say about this kid is that he was very intelligent. He was very enthusiastic he was very, he was a competitor when it comes to that type of, you know, if we could say like games or anything in life, he was a competitor. You know, he always brought out the best in everybody, and even in himself. Like just being himself, it really influenced a lot of people. I wouldn't say he had swagger, but I would say he had class. He had a lot of class. Cause swagger, I don't believe in swagger. I believe in class, and you know you can't pay for that. And his class was just natural. It came from deep within. Like I can't really explain it. You know what I'm saying? Like all I can say is that he was a ultimate dude. I love him, and ain't nobody else that could replace what he was to everybody.
Maybe this will go, maybe it won't. Anyway, my project is called The Art of Dying Young, and it is an augmented reality bike tour that takes you through the neighborhoods of Bedford-Stuyvesant and South Williamsburg, told through the lives of two young men, Little Rich Duran in South Williamsburg and Italo Machawi in Bed-Stuy. This project is not about death. It's about humanity and life. The Art of Dying Young is about human legacy. It's about landmarking both the mundane and extraordinary in our institutions. Human asset. What I've learned from researching the lives of Little Rich Duran and Italo Machawi is not that all institutions are not buildings and bureaucracies. People are institutions. And that brings me to the subject of lost potential and lost assets. The institutions of family, ritual, community, even personhood are assets and even monuments. When there is loss of a young person in our community, that's a loss of a human asset. The community loses an institution. In urban communities, youthful mistakes have heavy consequences. Some of these consequences manifest in permanent loss, and others result in temporary loss, like incarceration. The loss of these young assets not only creates a psychic drain on our personal families, it drains the communities of its youthful potential, and it loosens the fibers of community. Most people, once they get past a risky age, mostly become contributors to society in some way. It's a small percentage of folks that live a lifetime performing high-risk behaviors. Most folks, given a chance, grow into family men or women, and they are contributors to cultural landmarks. Again, all institutions are not buildings or bureaucracies. Some institutions are as simple as a local domino game. But none of these footprints are required to be complex, but all of them require a person, a kid, a son, a daughter, to grow towards their potential, to be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Shawn, and thank you to all the panelists. I want to jump us into the conversation because we have a little time together, but I'll kick us off for the first two questions. I want to remind you guys, as well as our virtual audience, to tweet and share questions as well, because we'll open it up to you. And I would love for you guys to consider this particular moment. I want you to speak of this moment. It seems like there's a window right now where so many people are speaking about criminal justice issues. Politicians have their platforms, foundations, state legislators, corporations. Could you guys do a simple round about what are you seeing, what is frightening you? Speak of this moment and how it might impact.
I want to say real quick, today's the anniversary of Freddie Gray's death in Baltimore. And I live in Baltimore and Seattle right now, and I was there during the time. And I think for a lot of people, that was their tipping point to where they felt like something needs to be done. But some people, it was Trayvon, something needs to be done. And for me, it started with, seeing Rodney King get beaten. And and the cops being acquitted for that. So I think there's a risk of it being a trend that people are talking about, because many of us have been doing this for years, and if it wasn't for organizations like Creative Capital, we would not be getting, the funding is significant, and I have a nice stack of rejection letters from organizations that did not want to touch this because it was not a popular thing. I'm concerned about that. We talked a little bit about that earlier. And there is an opportunity and there is a window, but even with what we're doing today, it has to go beyond this meeting, this conversation. It has to continue.
Thank you.
At the kind of state legislative level, there's an interesting coalition between maybe we could call it a progressive and conservative groups that have come together, and that is offers some momentum on the legislative front, in which kind of deals can be brokered. From everywhere in Oklahoma right now, they're looking at doing an overhaul. You see them struggling at the federal level to kind of come together. Polling data tells us that the place that conservative and liberal folks come the closest together on any issue is juvenile justice reform. And that is part of a hard-fought effort by grassroots groups, the individual family members that we've talked about, by artists, by policy folks coming together. And so that all offers possibility. At the same time, there is a lot of money at play, and that as we re-envision and try to come up with a better way of making us safe and having a justice system, the corporate interests are not like giving up. They're not walking away. And so they're looking at, hey, we might move that money from holding people in cells to digitally monitoring them. And so it's going to be a cat and mouse battle going on. And my final plug, maybe what's the risk is that we can't leave this battle to legislative. There is the cultural side of this fight, that we can make a legislative change in Oklahoma, but once that money goes away that pushed that campaign, it's left behind the culture of the community. And I'm talking about racism. I'm talking about the historic nature that we heard about, that we have to address that also. So that's kind of where I see the risk. So there's possibility that's incredible right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really glad, Nick, that you brought up that aspect of the cultural and the perceptual, because this problem, this crisis that we have, we've all allowed it to grow. And it's grown in the shadows for many, many years. And it's only now sort of coming out more into the light. And there are forces from all over the place that are really trying to grapple with it. And it's so complex. And I know that, in speaking just for myself, I've made a decision to not stay so grounded in Arizona, because I feel my community really digging its heel in the ground to maintain the status quo. Whereas the work that I'm doing in California and here in New York is where I see communities making a concerted effort to really shift the system. And I think that that's one of the things that artists have really played a critical role in helping grapple with that from so many different perspectives.
Yeah, I think what you brought up about the systemic, the systemic issues, I'm thinking a lot about some of the folks that have been involved in 96 Acres, the educators that have been just really radically thinking about curriculum and using the work that we've been doing as a departure point to then build curriculum in the classroom to work with their students. Or I'm thinking also about the Black Lives Matter movement, all of the Chicago activists that are doing incredible work. And also the Torture Justice Memorial, the reparations that were recently, gotten for all the folks that were tortured by police. And so there's just been a lot of really incredible work that I want to also just sort of highlight, and folks that are really on the ground doing these things in different capacities, whether it's education or on the street or through local scholarship, through local, mobilizing. And it's I think that's the window of opportunity right now, is this sort of mobilizing of folks.
Right, and you find yourself in the pathway of it all too, as an artist, being creative to respond to the multiple communities.
Right.
Beautiful.
I mean, for me, I think what my charge is to try to connect people to other people in their community and understand that every asset lost is not just a loss to a particular community, it's a loss to humanity. There's a thing that happens to astronauts when they go up into space for the first time and they see the Earth from above and they're watching it, and they say after that they never look at humanity the same way. They see that we're all Earthlings and we're all one people, and they see the human race as one unit, and they talk about that. And I think one of the things we tend to do as human beings is be tribal, and we tend to separate ourselves from other people, and we don't look at a human loss, whether it be imprisonment or be death of a loved one, as a loss for all of us. So I think that there's a value misplacement when people are easily, put into these towers and criminalized.
I thank you all for the wide range and the multiple perspectives and the angles that you're illustrating to us, such a complicated, contradictory arena. But now I want to take it a little bit closer to you as individual artist. And I want to speak a little bit about what with your practice allows you to know when you're elevating the cause or when you might be getting in the way. So we could speak a little bit about your own artistic practice and sensibilities and feeling as you're moving through the various movements.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest risks in presenting work, you can make people feel good about doing nothing. And if you some people can, it's like NPR, you can listen to a story about the water shortage in Darfur and you can feel, oh, I'm enlightened now, and you can, got a bottle of water here. So I think, and that's my just short answer, because I'd like to kind of keep going.
I feel that our work, there's a part of it that provides access to technology, to database management, and then that part is an elevation of political power, and that there's a place there where people are making their decisions about how to direct their campaigns at the local, state, or national level. On the elevation, on the where I feel I might be getting in the way as an artist is in '98, there was a sense when you were working looking at mass incarceration that you were airing grievance, that there was a time that we just had to say something is wrong. So I felt like when I looked back at the letter I sent Creative Capital in 2005, it was really just a desperate, something is wrong in our community. There's been so much work that has occurred artistically. There's been so much work that's happened at the grassroots among formerly incarcerated people. Our own generation who went inside, let's call it the hip hop generation, if you're my age, is now released and is present in the community with their own voices in their own ways. And I feel the tension for me, and it's a good tension, is I think the role of an artist like me is shifted, and that it's kind of pulling a little bit away. We don't need to air the grievance, that there's a lot of new voices that have come in, and trying to figure out where we can add our value, our love, and our art to the process.
Beautiful.
Michelle, I think you've asked the question that really keeps me up sometimes at night. And I spend a lot of time advocating for bringing in the voice of the individuals who are marginalized and often left out of the conversation as we're looking for solutions here. And to bring in individuals who have been incarcerated, who are incarcerated, whose parents are incarcerated, our children are incarcerated, who are victims, who are law enforcement folks, and really trying to bring them in to address these issues together, both as subjects and co-creators. And one of the things that I try to really watch for myself is, because my work relies heavily sometimes on these aesthetic gestures, these artistic, poetic gestures to frame a conversation for so many voices, people sometimes want me to have that earlier than I'm ready for it, because I'm trying to really have it emerge out of this collaborative process. And when I say people, I mean sometimes it's my co-creators, the participants in the project. They want me to tell them what to do, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. But sometimes it's, in order to get the project funded, we need to be able to articulate it and frame it for the grantor, so that they can see where we're going before we enter the process. So it's a really interesting back and forth.
When I was thinking, I feel the same way that it keeps me up at night too, and I think that that's something that, so like for 96 Acres, we have a steering committee, what we call a steering committee, and as I mentioned, it's made up of a bunch of folks that have a stake in the issue in some kind of way, and so for us, it's been really important that there's community accountability all the way through, so that they're shaping the work as we move along. And so, I mean, we've had conversations around art being too abstract or too didactic, and what that means. We've had conversations around the fact that some people still think we're a mural project. And if you know anything about Chicago, you know that the mural movement is strong. It's really rooted there in the city, and it's something that we're, I think, really kind of inspired and informed by. At the same time, on a very practical level, that wall is literally falling apart. There's just years of cement parchment on that jail wall. And so as we were thinking through this project early on and talking about murals, we realized that in order for us, if we wanted to paint a mural, we'd have to reconstruct the wall, which became, highly problematic. And so it's like, we're not going to do that. But we also have pressure from business folks who tell us, like, can you put that wall away? Like, can you put some paintings up or flowers? Can we put some, plants around there? And so it's something, I feel like a true organic kind of community process involves a lot of improvisation, a lot of listening, a lot of sensitivity, and just a constant back and forth reflection. And that's, I think one of the greatest challenges that we continue to have.
Beautiful, thank you.
I mean, with my particular project, one of the obstacles that I have is, making sure I have complete buy-in to my project from the families. And because I'm telling these family histories through these institutions and through these murals, I have to learn them from them, but they also have to understand what I'm doing. So just to explain a little more about what I'm doing, I'm using augmented reality to sort of implant these installations, film, audio, text, in various geospecific locations. And the reason I do that is because a neuroscientist will tell you that people learn through geographic context. So if they see something or experience something and it has an emotional connection to a physical space, they hold on to that memory about 30% more. So if I take you on a bike tour and I bring you to Italo Machawi's African Free School at the old Armory, and I give you an installation about that free school, and then you go to the mural at the end of that tour, you'll never forget that Armory was Italo Machawi's African Free School, because you associate it with a context now, a person, a context, a situation, an art form, right? So, but the problem I'm having with that is obviously it's technology based, and my fear is that the community maybe won't adopt that technology as fast as maybe, some of the hipsters that might be living in those communities. So my challenge is just trying to kind of merge the two, the community and the families with the use of that technology so they can experience it in the same way. So that's my...
Thank you. I just want to kind of point out this gift that we just were able to witness of you guys being very vulnerable and allowing us into the artist fears and uncertainties in doing this work. And there's a deep appreciation for that because very rarely do we get to see that. So thank you. And I could be really selfish and keep going in and asking more about intimacy. And was it Sue Ellen's piece in your presentation, Gregory, around family, or the 10,000 in the Cook County Jail? But I have to be open and open it up to you guys. So I won't be selfish. Let's see if there are any questions in the audience. And if any questions came through, and I think, might you have some? And there's a hand back here, so in person gets it first. Thank you. Oh, excuse me, can I actually offer some guidelines?
Sure.
Can I ask for your name, if there's an affiliation, and to be quick and succinct?
All the above.
And stand up now.
Shawn Leonardo. I am a current Creative Capital awardee with Melanie Crean and Sable Smith for Project Mirror Echo Tilt. And this is going back to something that's been mentioned a few times. When developing a platform for highlighting voices or allowing voices to be heard, when does that strategy fall short? Meaning, how are you enlisting audience? Who's actually listening? And so when does that platform what are its shortcomings?
Actually, this is the biggest problem is actually we're here and you voluntarily came here. Preaching to the choir is easy. How do we get the artwork to people who are not going to normally get the artwork? And I think that's one of the biggest issues, because I mean, you're our cheerleaders. You came here willingly, and I'm shooting a documentary now about my last show, and it was a very divisive show in many ways, a lot of mixed responses. And I was interviewing 8 people and at the museum where they showed the show. And everyone said, oh, powerful, strong. And I wanted one person to rip me a new one. I really wanted that. And I finally got that one person, and I really appreciated that because it helped me grow and to see someone else's perspective. So preaching to the choir is mainly.
We've spent a lot of time, at least one form of platform with Nation Inside. And that, it provides the different campaigns made up of grassroots groups, access to kind of a segmented data, right? Like they can manage their own email, manage their own database, make their own advocacy choices, use a website to put their own images out, generate their own stories. And that, kind of ties in with an advocacy community that they're pushing out 2,000 emails or 5,000 emails saying, hey, there's no parole in Virginia. There's a bill, we can push this, here's some stories, and connect it. So there's that kind of world, or the where artists around the country were pushing for the campaign for prison phone justice, from famous filmmakers to spoken word artists, and generating hundreds of thousands of actions. So there's that level. And then there's kind of a bringing it down to the face-to-face interaction, where we do network convenings, where a group of people will gather around either a topical issue or people who are grassroots leaders. I think there's shortfalls in maybe the leadership development that happens in some of that, where we really need to build a lot of leaders if we're gonna cement some of the victories that we're winning currently. We can roll in on a campaign, right? We can roll in as a social media movement and generate a lot of action, maybe switch legislators to take action or kind of switch the consciousness. But if we're not raising up that kind of leadership development that happens in the kind of drilled down work that we saw happening at that community level, then these social networks and platforms are really for naught at the end. You can remove all the technology, you can remove all the action, and if we haven't built like people on the ground who are the stakeholders. I don't know if people know Glenn Martin. He's kind of a New York person, national person, who just keeps saying over and over and over, those that are closest to the problem have the solutions, and they're often the ones with the least access to the resources. So I just want to echo Glenn on that.
Okay.
I'm going to just talk real personal for a moment here, and I've been kind of making this joke that I'm not applying for any more major grant projects without a line item for therapy. And that came out of doing a project with 10 men who were serving life without parole, and some of them had been arrested as juveniles, and teaching art class once a month on death row. And I just needed to make sure I was taking care of myself. This is hard work. And if I'm not grounded, then my participation in the facilitation role I play in it falls short. At the same time, and this is something I was thinking in response to the last question, is when the work gets messy, we have to hang in there. And this work does get messy in the same way paint or sculpture or whatever you're doing goes through these kind of destructive or messy processes. This work goes through that too, and it wouldn't find its richness if we didn't allow for that. And then kind of sort of looking at it from a different angle, I've done a fair amount of this work in museums, and I've really thought about it, especially in my community in Arizona, where I feel we have a shortage of community dialogue. And what the museum offered, which was just this incredible gift, sort of beyond its history of being a site of privilege and exclusivity, was it was a place where people from all kinds of different perspectives and belief systems behaved when they walked in. They quieted down a little bit, and they were okay looking at artwork that they didn't understand. And so that could be brought into service of bringing together people who disagree around this tough topic. And yet that has its shortfalls. So now I'm working a lot with agencies and organizations. That's a different ball of wax. It just got to hang in there.
Can we go to, this is the left, and then to you, sir. Please.
Hi, Susan Herman. I'm the president of the American Civil Liberties Union. And as some of you may know, mass incarceration is our #1 priority right now around the country. So we've been sort of trying to select places around the country that we think are ripe. And one reason why we're involved in this Oklahoma initiative, which is a ballot initiative, is to really try to get Oklahoma. We think there are real opportunities there to just get them to stop locking up so many people. And then Oklahoma is real close to Texas. So maybe you can get that domino to fall. So it seems to me, I'm hearing I completely respect that you're starting locally and starting with grassroots and trying to build local leadership. But at the same time, there are national movements where your organizations like the ACLU are spending a lot of time trying to pick the places in the country that are ripest for really big change. And so what I wanted to really ask was a question, kind of a similar question about audience and how we amplify your voices, because it seems to me that despite the coalitions, the only way we win in a place like Oklahoma is to remind the people of Oklahoma, to make them know that we're talking about the lives of people. What really fueled a lot of the growth in incarceration was the trend in the 90s to refer to criminals as predators and animals, and to just pretend that they just weren't human. And it seems to me that the common element of all your work is just insisting on the humanity of the people who are involved here. So what I would love to hear, I hear parts of what you're saying about working with organizations as opposed to doing your own work, but what do you think about the opportunities for coordination? How can we get all of your voices into Oklahoma at a point where I really think it could affect a lot of people's lives?
Thank you, Susan.
I'll start off by saying we have 2,800 members in Oklahoma, and they do a rotating meeting between Oklahoma City and Tulsa. Every other month, it's a group of family members who've been pushing at the state level and who've been advancing the ballot initiative. They've been very active. So some of the people who are airing out stories are folks that we've been working with for the past decade or so. So some of these connections exist, where the artist kind of sphere and what we'll call the palace sphere that the ACLU is working in, there's intersection that probably exists that we might not maybe have the time or space to necessarily ferret out all the time. I do think that the call that you're making for more strategy to occur is brilliant and something that's really needed to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes. we are interested, and me and the collaborators I work with, we talk a lot about community scholarship, and we talk a lot about, kind of the value of hyper-local level work, because, I think that kind of work is at the same time very universal, that those kinds of strategies are things that are really useful for many kinds of situations. And so, for the next step for us is really thinking through, all right, we've mobilized all these folks on the outside, folks that maybe would never have considered being part of any of these projects or listening in to any of the work we've done. But now we want to work with the folks on the inside. And so that's a big step for us that we're making, and we're excited about that opportunity, but we're also thinking about these things. How can we contribute to this larger dialogue? So, yes.
Great. I'm hearing some future programming opportunities. I didn't hear. And then I see you in the back next. Please stand, and a microphone is coming to you. Right. I'm sure you could, but we actually need it for if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Cornell Alston, and I am a Creative Capital awardee along with Kaneza Scar, who is my partner, and we're doing a presentation called Knots, which is also dealing with reentry. I recently spent 33 years in prison, and you were 100% right. This work is not for the faint of heart. It's hard work, and you do not have to do it alone. There is a whole resource that is available that is not being used by our community and our society, and those are people who are formerly incarcerated, who have changed their lives around, who are looking to come out and make a difference, who want to speak to these young people and tell them that the way that they're going is not the way to go. However, a lot of times when we come out and we want to do this work, our asset is viewed as the liability. It took me a long time. I work with youth. I work with at-risk youth. I also worked in gang prevention. And it took a very long time for me to be able to officially work with our young people, because they said, oh, you were in prison. You have a criminal record, and you are or parole. And that is a resource that I believe our community should actually demand. I made a mistake years ago. I took from the community. I was rightfully taken away from the community. I was rightfully rehabilitated, got myself together, and come back out here to give back. And the community should not only want, but demand that I give back. Nice. And all the other people that come out and want to give back. We have a lot of fruit that are dying on the vines that are inside because parole won't let them go, and they're ready. They've turned their lives around, and what they want to do is come back and make a difference in our communities, but that's another aspect that we need to change is parole. So, and I work with an organization called Rehabilitation Through the Arts, and we are in 5 communities. I was actually introduced to the arts through Rehabilitation Through the Arts, and we use the arts, dance, visual arts, drama, theater, as a way of teaching life and coping skills to people who are not only incarcerated so that they can better their lives and come back out and give back, but also in the community with the youth, using that as a way of teaching coping skills so that they don't go that way. So we're trying to get it on both ends. And I think that's the way to go, and I commend all of you. And there's a lot of things going on out there. Continue the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Any comments? There was an individual in the yellow, and then can we pop over to the hat? Thank you, sir. Oops.
My name is Jules Verdone. I'm a writer and editor who's been working with justice reform nonprofits for many years. First, I just wanted to ask if there are funders in the room, if there were a show of hands of anybody who would fund therapy for these people. I'm just curious. I thought that might happen. My question is quick, is to ask all of you on the stage which incarcerated and formerly incarcerated artists you would suggest we pay attention to.
I would start with the voice of Etheridge Knight, the poet. I think Knight's body of work is incredible. And then living, I would say Dwayne Betts would be someone also to just check out his writing and his work.
I would say there's a group in Chicago called the Visible Voices Ensemble, and it was started by a group of women that were formerly incarcerated that are transitioning out, and they did a theater project that contributed to the 96 Acres Project, but it was started through Bobby Brzezinski at the Goodman Theater and these group of women that initially got connected because they were going to do a resume building workshop, and somehow it turned into an ensemble theater project. Because they said, we want to do theater, you know, and so it's a really incredible group of women.
I was inspired by that project. Of course, it slips my mind completely, but that project where prisoners were painting corporate criminals.
Yeah, nice project.
Like the Koch brothers. There's murals of like the Koch brothers and other corporate criminals all around New York City that are painted by people in prison. And if you Google that, I'm sure, you'll find it. But I was inspired by that project particularly.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a long-running writing program in San Quentin, and I had the opportunity to go to one of the open houses and hear some of the readings. No particular, but I was just blown away. And the art program, I forgot the organization in California, that area, that sponsors art program, because the state funding went away, but an organization came up. And they've done a great job. They put out this amazing book, and I remember seeing this oil painting. And I hate when someone says, this is pretty amazing for a prisoner. I say, it's pretty amazing for anyone, because the level was incredible, and they had this ability before they went in. And seeing one of the videos earlier with the woman was looking to be a plumber, and I'm thinking, she had that ability before she went in. And so yeah, I think you look at all the people who are doing amazing art programs within the prison. I mean, there's talent there. And 2 years ago, I work with the Prison Policy Initiative. I wanted to address your statement, by the way. A lot of us work with organizations that we partner with, because I think it's important to partner with these organizations, whether it be Prison Policy, and another organization in Seattle is Post Education Program. What they do is when people come out, they helping get money for college, for housing, because those are big barriers. It's not just voting; it's many barriers. And they're the organization that also got me in the prisons to be able to do performances and talks. And I think there's so many layers. As Michelle was talking earlier when she was introducing this, we could break it down to the youth aspect, the recidivism aspect, to the conditions within the prison, the lack of health care, the horrible food, the solitary confinement. I mean, we could just go on and on and on. And but I also see the common thread here is that we're all partnering with folks. And right now, hopefully you'll be a partner, and you'll be a partner, and we'll all be partners, and there'll be some connections made after this to continue this work, because it is hard work. I mean, I burn out every 6.5 months, and I have to go take a long walk, because the hyper awareness, when you study this system and you realize, and you're in it, and you realize how, not in it like you, but in it in a sense that you're being empathetic and being affected and taking on this, it is hard, man. It's really hard. So thanks again for what you said.
Thank you.
I feel kind of torn between naming a few and not naming a lot. I want to give a shout out to Isaac Scott and this group here in New York called Confined Arts. And one of the things that they're doing, I think that's really interesting, in addition to having an exhibition of work made by people who are incarcerated, they set up phone calls. And so you'll go to the exhibition during the opening, and they have times where people are calling in and talking about their work. And it just enlivens it in this amazing way that I just think is dynamic. The other sort of thing I want to talk about is happening in Southern Arizona for many years around this retired university professor named Richard Shelton. And I select somebody like Ken Lamberton, who's a published author who spent maybe 14 years inside. And all of these men and women in state and federal prisons would like take Richard's Tuesday evening writing class for 8 years. And they're just like, Richard is like a curmudgeon, girl, you know, he's got some rigor there. And you come out of Richard's writing class after 8 years and you've got an MFA level training. And that doesn't always happen, right? That doesn't always happen. So those are just two.
Lovely, thank you. One question behind and then Brian. Thank you.
My name is Rasu Jalani. I'm a civic engagement practitioner. This question particularly is geared towards Shawn Peters, but please oblige me if this applies to any of you other projects. How do you navigate gentrification and the shift in community dynamics with your project, given that some of these murals may be old and some of the communities may have moved out or been pushed out? So how do you, like, I'm pretty sure it may have created a challenge, but I just want you to unpack that a little bit and talk about your process.
That's the main challenge, man. The main challenge is, you know, finding these families. One, I mean, I've been doing this, I got the Creative Capital Grant last year, and I've been working on it since, and my main challenge is getting response back from the families, you know. I have been lucky to find 2 really good ones, but I started with 4. And then I realized, originally my project was gonna be just the murals, and then once I started talking to the families, I realized, wait a second, these people have built all these institutions in these neighborhoods, you know, and most of these families have been implanted in these neighborhoods for 75, 80 years. And so once I started realizing that, I was like, oh, I need to expand this out and tell the stories of these institutions and then bring it back to the mural. The issue around gentrification is a real thing because our neighborhoods in New York have become transitory. You know, we have a lot of Airbnb and there are always these people walking around with suitcases in and out of Bed-Stuy and Williamsburg that nobody knows who they are. And they just kind of come in and come out. And so there is an issue around you know, the stability of these monuments. I mean, just today I went by a mural, one for Corey, another kid, Kasim, that was repainted. You know, I used to see Corey all the time and it was fading almost to deletion. And just today I came back from voting for Bernie Sanders, put it out there. And I saw the murals beautifully repainted. And I was like, oh, they painted the Corey mural over. So. And then I researched the artist that repainted it. So there are artists out there that are taking it upon themselves to repaint these murals. Some of these murals, however, are being erased. They're being painted over. There's a whole, in Bed-Stuy, there was a block, sort of a half a block long mural that, young Halsey, that chronicled deaths of many, many people in the neighborhood, people who were valuable to the neighborhood. And it's gone now because the building was bought. And the people who bought the building decided that they didn't want that on their building, you know. And so there is like sort of this weird sort of land grab that's going on in some of the urban communities, and there are new people. So my choice to do the project was not to alienate the new people and not to continually talk about gentrification in a kind of confrontational way, was to figure out a way to contextualize the community for the new people and the people who live there so that they can, you know, be forced in a way to look at the buildings and the streets they live on and see people and see history. So that's what I want to do.
Lovely. We have 2 last questions because we want to have time for mingle. We'll have Brian and then it's going to be our online audience.
Thank you. I'm Brian Tate. I'm Executive Director of MAP International Productions and a longtime friend and consultant to Creative Capital. I'm a marketing strategist. And I have a question to come back to the discussion about audience and narrative. It seems to me that one of the things that starts to create change around very complex social issues is when we can cross this divide between us and them. And you know, when I think about different social movements that have effectively done that, currently would possibly be the issue around heroin addiction, where there's now a different sort of thought process because there's a different sensibility and a different narrative about who is actually affected by heroin addiction, when for years it's been seen as a them, and now it's considered more of an us. And the question that I have, considering all of the different types of communities and different types of people who are affected by mass incarceration, which includes people who are inside, people who are coming out, people who are in danger of going in, people who are working in prisons, et cetera, is there a way, through your projects, is there a way that we, as people hearing about your projects, can actually activate this larger sense of us that includes not only the people who are immediately affected, but the larger group of people who may be affected peripherally, secondarily, etc.
How much time do we have? No, but realization a few years ago was we talk about the system as if it's broken. The system's not broken. It's working exactly the way it's intended to work. And if you look at the people are affected by it in a negative way, but there's $80 billion coming down on the state, federal, and local level. And to take that candy away is the big thing. I mean, to try to make it not taste as good, that's part of the challenge. And reframing the people who are inside as not all deserving to be there. To shift that way of thinking is one of the biggest challenges. And when we talk, a lot of times we say, I feel that, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of times we talk from not being fully informed. We're not having fully informed conversations. And I think part of our work in making people aware, and we're also, again, partnering with a lot of organizations that are giving, you know, we're putting knowledge out there. But getting it to be part of the regular curriculum, getting it to be this big shift in way of thinking is a huge challenge. So I don't really have an answer for you, but I just wanted to make those few observations, and maybe one of you can elaborate more.
Early in our work, where we were rural, like kind of and then the folks being shipped in were urban, with support from Creative Capital and the MAP Fund, we brought a hip hop musician together with a mountain musician, and we made hick hop. hill hop if you want to be a little bit more polite. And then we kind of looked at the roots, and we dug into the banjo has its roots in Africa and da 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 da. And so we started to look at that kind of cultural lens of that. And then we can look at in the U.S., like there's a pain belt, and it stretches from Maine all the way to Mississippi through rural white communities where people have been injured through small manufacturing, timber, coal, and end up getting addicted to OxyContin, which was pushed in a federal case. They admitted it, that they were dumping OxyContin into that region that raised the rates of incarceration in those communities. And there we start to see that we could have some allies with the urban struggle. To me, the way I've always thought about this issue is in rural communities and in urban communities, we don't have the political power on our own to advance the change that we want. So we have to figure out ways to link those communities together, because the agenda that's going to come down, if we're not doing that, is probably not the agenda that's going to, for example, shift the fact that the number one budget item in a state like Virginia is incarceration. That's over schools and that's over transportation. And so I think there's that challenge. I think that we have to be very creative. I think that one role the arts can play is kind of breaking down. There's the hard racial barrier. I think white communities, obviously, we've seen it in the last year, that there's a lot of racism in working in white communities in general, and that there's this kind of like clinging to what's left of an economy, what's left of a manufacturing base, and that clinging is equaling really bad policy that is kind of cutting off the leg. So, and I think in all those cases, the arts can get in, can dance with it, can shift some thinking, and can move us forward. And the final thing is, we know from the civil rights movement that song and dance was what wove it all together, and that people coming together along those rhythms was what kind of built a movement that kind of moved us out of our individual silos. So, I mean, that's for me where the beauty is, and finding those moments, and they might be fleeting, but the more I think we can have layers of them, the more we could have that big societal shift that you're speaking of.
Can I say something about that? I think there's also there's a connection we need to make in terms of, violence and drug addiction. I think people neglect sort of psychotrauma, and as well as even science. There's a study called epigenetics, which talks about genetic trauma being transferred from person to person over generations. There's also a study of how lead poisoning has affected the mentality of kids and violence in communities in places like Baltimore, like Freddie Gray and places like that. So I think once you start looking at sort of negative behavior, whether it be drugs or violence, as more of a scientific, and you start looking at them more scientifically, more medical and mental health, whatever it is, you start looking at people as whole people. And you're saying, well, what's the nascence of this sort of psychotropic, or whatever the word is, whatever the word is, where's the trauma coming from that creates the behavior in these communities? And you start looking at people as people. So I think once you start, we start focusing on that as artists and start looking at that, maybe, I don't know.
Lovely.
I hope that made sense.
I'm trying to interpret Ruby's gestures. Yes. Okay, great. This is from our online community. Thank you.
There's a lot of artists who are also interested in these topics. So I just wanted to kind of make it really open and say if there's anything that you can suggest and encourage artists to do, or how they can get involved. There's also a question about, from a lawyer who says, what are the obstacles that you've faced with gaining access to work with prisoners, and how do you use lawyers in your practice? So.
Thank you.
It varies from prison to prison as far as the restrictions, as far as going in, and a lot of that is up to the warden. And I mean, the restrictions. I mean, some prisoners can't get hardcover books. Some prisoners can only get 3 books, up to 3 books. I mean, so there's a lot of different restrictions. And and we, the organizations I work with, yes, they work. We work with lawyers, yeah.
In terms of the jail, the executive director, they don't use the term warden at the jail. They always say executive director. Her name is Anika Jones Tapia, and she's a clinical psychologist. She's the second psychologist in the history of the jail. The first psychologist was around in early 1970s. He brought B.B. King to perform at the jail, where folks that were detained were able to invite their family members to come and watch him perform in the yard. So it's an interesting time in Chicago to be doing this work at the jail, because the sheriff has been pretty outspoken against Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who has helped close down a lot of these mental health institutions and school closings, so many things. And it's something that they talk a lot about, is this term crimes of survival, meaning folks that just don't have a place to stay, or that don't have access to really basic needs, and then end up right in jail. They can't pay the bond, they end up there for months and months and all of that. So that, I think, uniquely has enabled us to gain a little window of opportunity to then do some of this on-site work that I'm not sure we would have been able to do, say, 5 years ago. So we're trying to make. I mean, it's unfortunate, right, that that this is the situation, but it has provided a kind of access point for us right now.
I would add that in addition to forging my own relationships with jails and prisons, I've actually buddied up a lot with existing programs. There's really great programs, and they're also often very welcoming of people to come in, and maybe you have to do a training, but it's really a nice way to begin those relationships and learn those systems.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for a very rich, amazing conversation. Please know that the conversation can continue. All of our artists have agreed to be available for the next 24 hours online, so tweet them questions and they'll be able to respond. How generous is that? But more importantly, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right.